That out in Santa Barbara, California, a number of years ago, firefighters were going out to respond to calls in these communities that they've serviced for years. They got on their engines, got out there, and couldn't remember where they were going. And they had cell towers on their fire station, right? So there were some scientists who came in and did a pilot study, and they examined their brains, and they could tell that there was damage to their brains from the cell towers. So the International Association of Firefighters has already put out a position statement that until this technology can be proven safe, we are not conceding to have this anywhere near our firehouses. And if it's not good enough for the strongest among us, what the heck are we doing? Putting it in our neighborhoods, putting it in our schools, handing it to children to play with, wearing it on a watch, going to sleep with it, thinking we're doing our body a favor by checking our vital signs or something. But it's time. It's time for us to really come up to speed on this. But the industry's swift. They're up in Congress trying to push through legislation, and they're sort of being effective with it. So we need to get on it and start talking about this in our own communities. And the town of Burlington, Massachusetts, was approached by Verizon with applications for 7 small cells. And they said, but it could be 14, and then it could be 30. And the Burlington selectmen were like, whoa, 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 what do we know about this? And they had more questions than Verizon could answer. So they formed a town-wide committee on small cells. And they spent 4, 5, 6 revisions of this policy they come up with. And they put the typical things like it's got to be able to blend in with the environment. It's got to be able to be painted. You can't have it in the middle of the sidewalk for ADA, because in addition to a small cell, what they're not forthcoming with is it comes with a refrigerator-sized box on the ground to power it. So there's a lot to it. But Burlington put in their policy, and they ratified it in October, that if a vendor wishes to come into our community and put this technology in, you can't just drop and run, which is what they usually do. They'll install it and never come back again. They said if you're going to install this in Burlington, you have to come back every year and recertify that it's still viable. And we don't have expert staff to do that recertification process. So we're going to have to hire a consultant. So you, Verizon, and every other vendor are going to have to pay a fee to oversee that process. And the Verizon lawyer was in the meeting the night that this policy was ratified, and he said, well, not all the equipment can be painted, and we don't want to set a precedent for recertification annually, and we don't want to set a precedent for an annual fee, so they withdrew their 7 small applications. So we do have some good examples out there that we can turn to try and stave this off until the science catches up to public policy. At the federal level, as the industry is trying to push this through, I'm very grateful to Senator Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut. He was a 20-year Attorney General. And in the fall, there's a fairly new FCC commissioner by the name of Brendan Carr, and he was out in South Dakota. And somebody asked him in a public forum or a hearing if 5G is safe. And he said, oh, yeah, we rely on the FDA and, blah, 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 and it's fine. So Blumenthal reached out. He and Congresswoman Anna Eshoo out of California sent a formal letter to the FCC that said, by December 17th, please send us the scientific studies upon which you base this claim of safety. And they never got a reply from the FCC. And the current FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, is a former senior lawyer for the industry, for Verizon. And so there was a hearing with the Commerce Committee back in February, and the industry was there. And Blumenthal got up and said, can you please help me to understand what independent science the industry has funded to show that this is safe? And there were a couple of industry reps there who both came up empty. All they'll say is that, well, we're within FCC guidelines, which were never safe to begin with. So Blumenthal said, so basically we're flying blind here, right? So they are starting, and there's another representative out of Oregon who also has begun to question this. So we're getting closer. Anna Eshoo then went on and introduced a bill to restore local control to our communities in the implementation of 5G. So we can say no thank you. But it's all up in the air and happening right now. A bit of good news is there are a number of bills out there. Massachusetts is leading the nation. We've got 19 bills. My Senator Spilka introduced a bill on my behalf, and we don't move very fast in our legislature. We have 2-year sessions, and she introduced a bill on my behalf in 2015. It actually made some progress. The Committee on Public Health reported it out favorably, but then it got bundled up and sent to study at the next committee level. She brought it back last session under her own name, which was great, and it once again passed Public Health, because when these bills were coming up for hearing, I created a template and asked everybody I could find, from scientists to doctors to public health experts to people who are ill from this to concerned citizens to public servants, please send in testimony to say we've got to get ahead of this. So Senator Spilka is now our Senate president in Massachusetts and can no longer introduce legislation. But my state rep brought my bill back, and I'm so grateful. And he brushed it up to include 5G in it this time, too. So we actually have 19 bills in Massachusetts to address various aspects of man-made radiation. New Hampshire has an excellent bill right now with Representative Patrick Abrami. They move really swiftly there. I'm so impressed. Their committees have already been formed. The bill was assigned to the House Committee. I think it was Science, Technology, and Energy. I came up to testify. The retired president of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg, is a whistleblower on this. He flew in to testify. Dr. Paul Elroux out of McGill University is a medical school teacher, professor, and researcher, and he came in to testify, and they reported that bill out favorably on the floor from the House. It's now with the Senate, and they put it into Health and Human Services, which is really where this belongs. And we're hopeful that it'll pass there, too. So other states, Oregon, Montana, Maryland, a bunch of them have legislation. So that would be a good thing for us all to do. We're very, very pleased that the first U.S. healthcare conference on this is going to happen in September out in Santa Cruz, California at 1440 Multiversity. So this is something you can share with your own medical teams, doctors, nurses, social workers, everybody, alternative healers, everybody is welcome to register for this conference. And we are flying in the world's leading scientists and doctors to teach us what microwave radiation is doing, how to diagnose it, how to treat it, and how to educate our families. So we're very pleased that that's finally happening. And I know we're getting short on time, but I wanted to share with you, to help your towns, there's a policy paper that has come out of Washington, D.C. from the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, because we are way behind the rest of the world here. We're still using wireless, which is slow. If we're honest with ourselves, it's pretty crummy technology. The signal isn't reliable, the speed is lousy. But when you hardwire with an Ethernet cable, like we did 10 years ago, plug it into the back of your router, then you can plug your devices in on the other end, and then just go into the router and turn off those wireless antennas. And I didn't know how to do that. So I called up my internet service provider, and they said, oh, sit down at your computer, and we'll walk you through it. And I'm like, wow, I can do this from my computer, right? So they showed me how to set up my account online, and I just went into wireless settings. And there it was. There was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna in the triple play box that came, you know, cable, internet, and telephone. There was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna, and there was a 5 gigahertz antenna. I didn't know I had two of them in there. So I just went off, apply, and then I went and measured, and all the radiation was gone. So in my house, we have hardwired all of our technology. My PC, my own PC, is my work tool because I'm a writer. That's always been hardwired. But I had switched over to a wireless mouse, a wireless keyboard, so I went and dug out my old good ones, plugged them back in, and then I went into my computer and turned off the wireless signal that was in my computer. So my daughters like the Apple products, and I figured out that even though they've gotten so skinny that they don't have an Ethernet jack in them anymore, you can actually buy adapters. So this one's the Thunderbolt to Gigabit Ethernet adapter for, I don't know, $20 or $30. You just plug that into your Ethernet cable and then plug it into your device, and you have good technology. And you can actually do that. This is for their MacBooks. But you can actually do it for the iPhone and the iPad as well. So I mentioned I had my 15-year-old daughter who I was trying to keep safe. And I finally figured out through some nice videos on YouTube how to hardwire a cell phone. And I bring home this adapter. It's a Lightning to RJ45 Ethernet LAN network adapter. And I go to my daughter who's sitting on the couch doing her homework with her cell phone for 3 hours a night right there next to her. I said, okay, sweetie, plug this in. And, she's giving me the eye roll. I said, come on. And so she plugs it in, and I say, now go into your phone and turn off all those antennas. Oftentimes, if you just choose to put your device in airplane mode, it'll disable everything. But double check, because sometimes they'll pop back on with updates or something. So she turns everything off, and she's plugged in, and I say, okay, do something. And she does, and she goes, wow, it's so much faster. And I went, yeah, because I know it's faster. I know the signal's more reliable. I know her data's not flying through the air to be hacked. I know it's much more energy efficient to use hardwiring because wireless and all of our data storage and everything uses like 10 times more energy than hardwiring. So then I saw the light go off, and she said, so if I'm hardwired, does this mean that the signal's going through here and it's not eating into my data plan? I went, that's right, because if she goes over budget, we make her pay out of pocket. So that's how I got a teenager to buy into this, at least when we're at home. And then when she's on the go, I encourage her to only have on the antenna that she needs. So most kids don't even talk on the phone anymore, so turn off the cellular antenna. If you're only texting, just have the texting antenna on, right? You don't need the hotspot. You don't need the Wi-Fi. You don't need the Bluetooth. You don't need the locator. Just learn to be judicious. And when you're not using it, turn it all off and never, ever put it on your body if it's active. So hardwiring in our homes can be done. It's not rocket science, but you have to learn a little bit, right? And in our communities, hardwiring is the solution. So fiber optics. Don't let them just run it down your street, though, because if they just do that, that means they're going to come in and pop up with wireless nodes. And we don't want that in our neighborhoods, right? You don't want small cell antennas. So make sure that they're putting hardwiring to the premises, so fiber to the premises. That's the end game. And only as much power coming out of that fiber as we actually need. We don't want to blast our homes with more than what we need anyway, right? So we're in a good place today because we have some amazing resources that everybody can learn from. There's an award-winning film out called Generation Zapped, and we've had screenings all over Massachusetts. We actually had one at the State House. I was asked to co-chair a technology panel at the Health and Buildings Roundtable down at the NIH last summer. We got the producer to let us show it on a continuous loop down there. This is a really nice way to open this conversation with your community and your loved ones. It's 74 minutes. It's got the world's leading scientists, doctors, public health experts, people who have become ill from this in a lovely way. Sabine El-Jamail is a wonderful filmmaker. It's not fear-mongering. It just puts the information in there in a way that we can digest and start an important conversation. And on this journey, I've had the privilege of collaborating with a lot of the experts. I don't call myself an expert. I just got like a 5-year head start on you, so I can help you connect the dots. But I've had the privilege of collaborating with a lot of the real experts. And I volunteered my tech writing skill set to a couple of folks in the UK who figured out what this is, and one of them is a technologist whose job it was to put Wi-Fi systems in huge construction projects in the UK. And then he learned that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine in 2013 put out a position statement to our schools saying hardwire and do not expose children to wireless. So Brett West was like, well, what is this? And he had been an EMT in South Africa in his earlier years and grew up to be a technologist. So he very quickly did the deep dive and figured it out. And so he said, well, I'll just start a side business and I will go out and remediate and help people fix this in their homes, their offices. But he quickly learned you can't remediate because nobody even knows the problem exists. So first we must educate. So we worked really hard on developing a way to distill all the thousands of scientific studies, international best practices, medical recommendations into a half-an-hour course that anybody in the English-speaking world can take with our little nonprofit called Wireless Education. And I have cards on this there. Take any of the cards that are there. Take pictures of the books if you're interested. But literally in a half an hour, we can train an entire school. We can train an entire workforce. We've got a schools and families course. We've got a corporate safety induction course. And it kicks out a tip sheet at the end so you can walk around and go, oh, I never thought about the baby monitor. Or I never thought about sitting under that router at work all day. So we'll give you the practical tips. And we just want to help. We just want to get especially the children protected. So we've come up with a Robin Hood model. And if you have a business, or if there's a business in your community that's socially responsible, if they license the corporate course, and it's like, I don't know, $25 or $30, which is really low for corporate training, if they license that, then they can choose a local school and we'll donate the licensing to train the teachers and the older kids at the school. We do charge a nominal fee. It's like, I don't know, $7 or $8 to take the schools and families course because we have to pay for our legal counsel, we have to pay for our overhead, for our webmasters and our developers and our accountant and all of that. So even though we're a nonprofit, we do still have some expenses. But literally, for less than the cost of a movie ticket, maybe for Mother's Day, you could say, okay, to my children, to my adult grandkids, this is what I want for Mother's Day. Go take this course. It'll only take you half an hour, and then let's sit down at the table and talk about this so that we're all informed and we can choose together what we might do as a first step. Maybe we'll agree we never put it on our bodies again if it's in active mode. Maybe we decide we're going to shut off everything we possibly can at night and protect our sleep above all else. And then one by one, just look around. Take one device at a time. You can hardwire them. There's other things like Pluggable is another company that makes adapters for Android systems or Chromebooks. But go on their website and look to see if your particular device's operating system can be hardwired. Not all of them can, but many of them can. So the message is not no technology. It's safe technology. And with a little bit of education, we can start educating those around us because that's where the change, as everything else in our democracy, that's where the change happens. Because our public servants are only empowered to do what the public is asking them to do. And they've got a ton of issues. So if we only have one person talking about this, guess what? Not going to go anywhere. So, and I know many of you have been through many issues in your lifetime. You recognize big tobacco. You recognize, asbestos and DDT and thalidomide and all of those other environmental toxins. And this is just the biggest and perhaps the worst one that our world is facing today. But we're only at one point in time, so let's give it our best. All right. Any questions I can help you with?
What about that little rechargeable electric toothbrush that I put on the stand to charge at night? It's not making metal-to-metal contact box charging. Is that an example?
Yeah, so the question was, what about the electric toothbrush? I have a hunch that if there was any harm from that, it might just be dirty electricity, which is another thing we should be concerned about. But if it's not sending data to a device, then it probably doesn't have a radio frequency transmitter in it. And you should have seen me when I first fell down the rabbit hole with this. I was like, what about this little Yahtzee game I'm playing, you know? Is that harmful? What about the button I push to open up the garage door? Is that harmful? But once you get a device that measures microwave radiation, then you can answer those questions. So I invested, after I took a big gulp, I invested about $400 and bought what's called an acoustimeter. There are others that you can get for a couple $100s or less. But I like this one because it's big enough that people across the room can see it. And if there were no radio frequency in here, when I turn this on, it would just crackle a little, confirming it's working. If we see the light indicator is green, that's where the science is still discovering what the biological effects are. When it goes into yellow, that's where those symptoms of microwave sickness start happening. People aren't sleeping well. They feel anxious or depressed or suicidal ideation. They might have cognitive impairment, memory issues, erratic heartbeats. They might have skin things because we have little antennas in our skin that react to this microwave radiation. They might have nausea because it's affecting the mast cells in the gut. So that's the yellow. When we go into red, we literally have thousands of studies linking this to all of that, plus the bigger chronic things like cancers for children and adults, like neurotoxicity, genotoxicity, infertility. So here in this room, it's called the acoustimeter because we can hear these various signals. And that jumping up and down that it's doing, that's those spiked erratic pulses of microwave radiation going back and forth. So it's kind of a cool device to have because you never know where they're putting these antennas. So I thought I had my house completely sealed, right? So my daughter comes home from college and she asked if she could please turn on the Wi-Fi because she needed to download something. And I said, yeah, turn it on, then turn it right back off. And she was a swim instructor. She taught swim lessons in our pool in the backyard during college. And after she goes back to college, I'm sitting in my office and I'm working, and after about 2 hours, I'm like, why do I feel like the earth is sucking me down again? I slept great last night. I ate a clean organic breakfast. I didn't power up on sugar. So I turned on my meter, and it went into the red zone, and I'm like, what? And it was my printer. And on the front of it, it's got a little light that glows when the Wi-Fi is on, right? And I'm like, well, it's not on. Why is it doing that? So I just looked up the manual online, and it turns out there were 2 antennas in that too. So all I had to do was go into settings, and there they were, both antennas. And I just went off, off, apply, and then I waited for it to dissipate a second. And then I measured, and it was clean again. So my house is pretty good. I do get some bleed in from my neighbors because Comcast, so I had Verizon first, and then my husband saw a good deal with Comcast and wanted to switch us over, and he was very clear with them that we have to have no radiation in our home, right? And they said, oh, no problem, we can turn off all the antennas. So they come in, they switch out the boxes, and I said, okay, just humor me, and I run down to the utility closet, and I bring my meter with me, and the guy's down there, and I turn it on, and it's off the charts again. And I said, okay, so you got the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz antennas. You disabled those, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, and I understand that Comcast Xfinity is now putting a 2.4 and a 5 gig hotspot on our own routers at home. So you can throw signal, using your electricity, by the way, out to the street so anybody can pick up and maintain a connection, right?
If your router is rented by Xfinity.
Yeah, if your router is rented by Xfinity, good point.
Yeah.
So he said, yeah, I turned off those too. So he's disabled 4 antennas in our triple play box. And I said, okay, so why is it still emitting? And he said, I don't know. So the poor guy spent hours at my house trying to figure this out. He called their help desk. They couldn't help. So he said, well, I'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, I remembered a friend in Silicon Valley had mentioned that there was another antenna in there. So I reached out to him, and he said, yeah, they're outfitting you with wireless home security, whether you want it or not. They've put an antenna in there that's on. And I went, well, this is not good. So We went out that night. My husband ran out to Best Buy or wherever, and we bought our own modem router. And it has a switch on it, so we can manually turn the Wi-Fi off and on, right, when we need to. And so the guy comes back the next day, the Comcast tech, and he's got his supervisor with him to show him what's going on, because they have no clue. And the supervisor had no idea. And I said, well, I think I figured out what it is. It's that there's a 5th antenna for home security. And my friend in Silicon Valley tipped me off that you have to call and ask for a Tier 2 tech support person before they'll know how to help you with that. Yes.
So, CC, I have this smaller version.
The Acousticom.
And it doesn't have a digital readout, but it's useful. And I had wondered about an Infinity superstation in my neighborhood, so I went and knocked on the people's door, and they indeed do have a rented router, and I mean it's a massive signal.
It is.
It's part of the Xfinity business plan, but it does seem like Xfinity and Comcast can sort of bamboozle people into not really spelling this out, and so wherever you see an Xfinity super signal, that's somebody is voluntarily supporting that business by putting out a supercharged signal. But I wonder, in terms of the 5G, like that seems like one level of problem that people are unaware of. But on the 5G level, if a neighborhood gets together and is clear, I mean, and how do you, and do towns have to disclose like where these things are going, so that citizens can actually make a decision and say, as a community, like, we're not going to allow it in our neighborhood somehow,
Right.
or get the word out.
So that's excellent insight and questioning. I'm going to paraphrase because the microphone's up here and it might not pick up on video. But thank you for saying that you've seen that Xfinity signal throughout your neighborhood.
Well, on town, too. Everywhere.
Yeah, and townwide. And the question is there anything a community can do to stave off these small cell antennas? And I would encourage you to find a good answer for that. There is a wonderful group of people at Grassroots Environmental Education out of New York. They put up a couple of good websites. One is Americans for Responsible Technology. And on the 15th of May, which is next week, they're encouraging communities to stage a rally outside of your telecom companies, so the Verizon store or AT&T or Comcast or whomever, and start getting that public education out there. They also have a good fact sheet that's on their website by the Environmental Health Trust. That is a 2-pager that you can use to start talking about this issue in your community. Well, it's out there. And they also have a couple of letters that you can use to go door to door and say, we're learning that this is a biological threat to ourselves, our children, and our planet. Would you like to get together for a meeting? So definitely organize at the community level and then go to your town boards, because it's awfully hard for a town to say no when you've got 50 people in the room staring at you saying, we don't want this in our... But we also have to understand that the way the industry has set this up with our laws, it makes it very difficult for them to say no based on health or environmental concerns. They actually wrote that into the Telecom Act, Section 704, that you cannot claim environmental harm. And over the years, they've sort of interpreted that to include human harm, too. But that's not to say you can't do what Burlington, Massachusetts did and make it so uncomfortable for them or so expensive for them that they're not going to want to put this here. And I'd like to think we're getting closer to a tipping point. When you have Geneva and Brussels and Rome and other areas saying no, and when you have Senator Blumenthal and other high-level politicians saying, we need biological facts on this. So we could be getting closer to a tipping point, but don't ever think that anybody's going to fix this for you. You have got to stand up, because this is how our democracy was built. So, thank you. Yes?
Let's go back 70 years at least, when X-ray was just a toy.
Right.
And I stuck my feet in that
In the
little
shoe
slot.
store.
What?
In the shoe store. Right. So we're just at one point in time. We've been on this all Wi-Fi all the time honeymoon, and like this gentleman said, when he was a little kid, you'd go into the shoe store to get fitted for shoes, and they would x-ray your foot.
And you could
Which
stick
today
them
sounds
in there as long as you
ludicrous.
wanted to.
But you can imagine the health issues that were perpetuated from that. So we're just at one point in time. We haven't had this around long enough to have good public policy around it in our country. And our country, by and large, was one of the first inventors of this. And so there's a lot at risk financially. But as Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada said, the industry can do better. They just need a nudge. And they can make it faster, more reliable, safer, and it'll bring a whole nother economic boom, right? But they need a push, so that's our job. Yes.
Can you clarify again, when fiber optic is coming down Pleasant Street here in town, they're necessarily wiring businesses on Pleasant Street. They could also be putting cables in that, say, another company like Verizon could be putting small cells on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that,
Yeah, once that fiber optic backbone comes in,
right.
we need to have it go all the way to the premises and not stop short where they're going to throw up small cell antennas.
5G is a double-edged sword, sort of. Yes,
Yeah.
if you get into that high-speed stuff, it's fast, but it also is integral to, well, the super cable. It's very fast, but it's also integral to the 5G.
Yeah, another item you might want to discuss with your towns is where are we with the copper landlines,
Yeah.
right? Our phone lines, they're gone?
They're going.
They're going.
DSL
Yeah.
is now, I lost my DSL and I had to buy something expensive
Mm-hmm.
because they were putting those fiber optics right into the house whether you wanted them or not.
Yeah, and I remember when we would lose power in a winter storm, I still had a landline that worked. And now we've been switched over, and the battery on that, you know,
What do you mean you don't have a LAN? You don't have copper anymore?
they're switching the copper out and going with whatever they're putting in, be it cable or...
And then your phone, it will work on copper?
When you lose
Voice over
electrical,
Internet or
when you lose electrical, you lose it all now. And that is a
They
public
can't take
safety
it.
hazard.
They take it, like I still have a landline and still have.
Yeah, I use my landline at home. We've bought a backup power source, so should we lose electricity, it will
Yeah.
keep us powered for a few hours. But one time we lost our power for 36 hours. What are you going to do? What if you have somebody at home who's having an emergency? You haven't been able to charge your cell phone. What are you going to do? So there's many reasons, not just health, to encourage our towns and our governments to go back to hardwired technology. And this is free, it's online, and for anybody who leaves us your email address, like I said, I'll send out a document that has links to all these things that we've discussed tonight. So I know it's a lot to get your heads around, so freak out for 10 minutes, but then just know there are solutions.
There's an excellent website called Scientists for Wire Technology
Yeah.
on the West Coast. It's also
Yeah.
an incredible resource.
Yeah, that's Paul McGavin's site, and he's done a wonderful job with that. Ma'am?
Yeah, I think this is off the topic, because when he asked about electric toothbrush, you made reference that dismissed it in this context to dirty electricity. What is that?
So I'm not an engineer, but when we have an imbalance of the electrical currents coming in and out, and if they're not properly grounded to discharge it out, sometimes we have this imbalance that creates an electromagnetic field, not the digital pulse of radiation that we're talking about, but it creates a dirty electricity field that emanates into your house like 6 or 8 feet off the walls even, if your wires are not properly grounded. And that's one of the issues with the utility smart meters, is that they typically are not grounded. And so now this radio frequency can hop on your home wires or your pipes and kind of radiate your whole home. So, yeah, dirty electricity is a bad thing too. That in itself can be carcinogenic.
It's a colloquial phrase for bad power quality.
Yeah.
And there are power quality engineers, and if you're doing precise electronics, whether music industry, sound recording, things like that, or more, it's really important that dirty electricity be taken care of or filtered out. And most of what we get it from these days is when we're using DC appliances, things that run on direct current. but our grid is alternating current. Anytime you have a black box, like on your computer wire, or the smart meters actually run on DC, anytime there's that conversion, it screws up that nice even sine wave and puts static onto it.
Dirty sort of CFLs.
Yeah, CFLs,
Yeah, those swirly light bulbs, those are really bad. And actually, if I can share a little story with you before we wrap up, in our public library, when the energy industry was pushing those little swirly light bulbs to save energy, one of their marketing campaigns was to put a kilowatt meter in our library. So I think they donated them largely to libraries all over the place. And I had seen that, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to get a RF meter on loan in our library? So I went after a grant. The Boston Marathon runs through our town, and we get bibs from the association that organizes that. And then people take them and do fundraising and run the marathon. And then we've got this nice pot of community funding that our selectmen decides through applications who gets what. So I thought, cool, let's get a meter for the schools, let's get one for our library, and then everybody can just go measure. You have data, and now you can figure out what you want to do with it, right? Simple enough, right? So I submit my application. They say, oh, we really don't know. Come back next time. So 6 months later, I reapply, and they say, ooh, probably more of a Board of Health issue. And I'd already met with our health agent in our town, and he didn't know. So then my bill came up for public hearing with Senator Spilka, and I got to testify in 3 minutes. I'm holding up the science, I'm holding up Ashland's best practices, I'm holding up my meter, and I'm watching the Public Health Committee, and I could tell not one single person had any idea this issue existed. And so I thought, uh-oh. So over the next 6 to 9 months, I met with every single member of that committee and the committees to which a couple other bills had been assigned. And I realized you have to educate somebody for an hour or so before they can really understand what this issue is. And then I thought, whoa, I better go back to my town and educate there. So I asked for individual meetings with my selectmen, and one came to my home. I went to another's home where 2 of them met me. I met another one in a coffee shop. I met another one in a restaurant. So one by one, I educated them. And then I reapplied. And they said, well, they're still a little nervous about this, right? They said, well, we will give you funding for 1 meter conditionally, and that's that the library agrees to take it into circulation. And I thought, okay. So I got on the agenda for the trustees at the library, and one gentleman was very firm that this is all basically hogwash, and he didn't want it. Another one couldn't wait to get her hands on it and take it home and measure. And a third one said, well, regardless of how we feel personally, as a public library, we are a conduit of information for our community, and because we already had this 1 kilowatt meter on loan, that's what gave me the idea to put one of these on loan. So we already knew how to put one into circulation, right? So they voted 4-1. I was given the grant. I ordered the meter, wrote up a little bit of instruction for it, and anybody in my town can now take this out for a week, measure their home, measure their loved ones, take it to school, take it to work, see what's going on in your car. And I've heard that somebody in the Carolinas has donated one now to their library. Somebody in Belmont, Massachusetts wants to donate one. So that's something that collectively you could do as a community, is make the resources available. So, any other questions? All right. Well, you guys have been great. Thanks so much. I know it's a lot. And like I said, freak out for 10 minutes and then come back.